I discovered that my brother had sold the inherited property behind my back, and the consequences were worse than I imagined. I never imagined that something as simple as our family inheritance could destroy my relationship with my own brother. Since we were kids, he and I had been close, even partners in mischief. Our family was never perfect, but there was a bond one thought would be unbreakable. Everything changed after our father passed away. My father had been a reserved and meticulous man, always worried about making sure every detail of his estate was perfectly organized. Among his possessions was a property that had belonged to our family for generations. My brother and I were the only heirs, and although I always suspected that my brother had some selfish tendencies, I trusted that he would act sensibly. The days after the funeral were a mixture of grief and tension. Family gatherings were strained, with veiled comments and calculated looks. My mother, who had aged considerably over the past years, seemed especially worried about the fate of the property. I was determined to care for it and for her legacy, thinking my brother shared the same sentiment. A few days later, we decided to meet to review the inheritance documents. That was when I started noticing strange behavior from my brother. He avoided answering direct questions, changed the subject, and sometimes had a nervous smile I couldn't interpret. At first, I thought he was just dealing with grief, but soon his behavior raised more serious suspicions. The confirmation came unexpectedly. While reviewing the legal papers, I found a series of documents that weren't in the official folder. They were sales contracts, notarized, showing that my brother had sold the property without consulting me, without informing me, and for a substantial sum. I felt like the ground had shifted beneath my feet. My own brother had betrayed our most fundamental trust. The mix of disbelief and anger consumed me for days. I couldn't understand how someone who had grown up with me, shared secrets and joys, could betray me like that. What hurt the most was that the sale didn't just affect the property, it altered everything our family represented: memories, stories, and the sense of unity my father had worked so hard to preserve. I tried talking to him. I asked directly why he made that decision, hoping for a reasonable excuse, something I could understand. But his response was cold and calculated. He said he needed the money, that I hadn't shown interest in the property, and that he had done what he considered best for himself. That coldness cut through me like a knife. There was no remorse, no acknowledgement of what our relationship had lost. From that moment, every family encounter became a minefield. What were once warm conversations and shared memories turned into awkward silences, indirect comments, and resentful looks. My mother was devastated. She couldn't believe that her children, who had been so close, could reach a point of such deep betrayal. The final blow came when I learned that the new owners were already renovating the property. Every photo I saw online, every update on the construction, reminded me of my brother's betrayal. He hadn't just sold something that belonged to both of us, he did it without any remorse, without considering what it meant for me or for our family. I felt trapped in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Everything I knew about loyalty, family, and trust seemed to crumble in a matter of weeks. Sometimes I wondered if I could ever talk to my brother as I once had, if we could ever get past this. Each day, the wound in my heart grew deeper, and the reality of what I had lost became clearer and more painful. After the initial shock of discovering my brother had sold our family property without my knowledge, I struggled to process what had happened. The betrayal wasn't just financial, it was emotional, deep, and cutting. I spent nights pacing my apartment, replaying every conversation, every laugh, every shared memory, and wondering if I had ever truly known my brother. How could someone I trusted so completely act with such selfishness? I knew I couldn't just let this go. The property was more than land and buildings, it was a symbol of our family's history, our father's efforts, and the shared childhood memories that defined us. I consulted a lawyer, hoping there might be a legal way to reverse the sale. But the paperwork was meticulous. The sale had been finalized, notarized, and fully legal. My heart sank as I realized the reality: the property was gone, and there was nothing I could do to reclaim it. Despite this, I couldn't stop myself from trying to reach my brother. I called him, visited his home, even tried to speak to him through our parents. Each time, he remained cold, distant, and unrepentant. He didn't just defend his actions, he seemed to take pride in them, as though my pain validated his cleverness. I had always known he could be manipulative, but I had never imagined this level of cruelty. The tension in the family grew unbearable. Every gathering felt like walking through a battlefield. My mother, once the glue holding our family together, started showing signs of stress and sadness that broke my heart. She would try to mediate, to calm us both down, but every attempt ended in frustration. My brother refused to acknowledge the emotional impact of his actions, while I couldn't stop reliving the betrayal over and over again. One night, alone in my apartment, I received a phone call that escalated the nightmare further. The new owners of the property wanted to meet to discuss renovations and boundaries. I went reluctantly, knowing I had no legal claim, but I felt compelled to see the home one last time. Walking through the property, seeing strangers in the rooms where I had grown up, where my father had planted trees and painted walls, made me feel like a ghost haunting my own memories. During the meeting, the owners spoke politely, unaware of the personal history tied to the land. I tried to hold back tears, but at some point, they noticed my distress. They asked if I had family there, and I nodded, forcing a smile that didn't reach my eyes. They didn't understand that it wasn't just a home they had taken part of my identity, a piece of my soul that could never be replaced. After returning home, I realized that the impact of my brother's betrayal extended far beyond material loss. My trust in him was shattered, my sense of security with my family shaken, and my ability to see relationships as inherently good deeply questioned. I began to withdraw from him, from family gatherings, and from conversations that could lead to conflict. The family bond that once felt unbreakable now seemed fragile, like glass ready to shatter at any moment. In the weeks that followed, I tried to find closure through reflection. I wrote letters I would never send, detailing every emotion, every memory, every hope I had lost. I questioned my own judgment, wondering if I had missed warning signs in my brother's behavior, if I had been too naive, too trusting. The grief was heavy, complicated by anger, betrayal, and an aching sense of helplessness. Even now, months later, the consequences of that single action continue to ripple through my life. My relationship with my brother is irreparably damaged. My mother mourns not just my father but the family unity that has been fractured. The property, once a symbol of inheritance and legacy, now represents loss and betrayal. I have learned harsh lessons about trust, boundaries, and the fragile nature of familial bonds. Though I have tried to move on, I know the memory of this betrayal will linger indefinitely. Every conversation, every family gathering, is tinged with the knowledge that the person I trusted most could act with such cold calculation. I am left with a choice: to carry this bitterness and let it define me, or to acknowledge the pain, learn from it, and attempt to rebuild my life without the shadow of my brother's betrayal dictating my every move. The tension between my brother and me didn't subside. In fact, it seemed to grow heavier with each passing day. Family gatherings became exercises in restraint, with everyone walking on eggshells to avoid triggering a confrontation. Even casual conversations were layered with unspoken resentment and suspicion. It was as if the sale of the property had created a silent war, one that left everyone emotionally drained and anxious. One evening, I decided to confront my brother directly. I wanted answers, explanations, some form of acknowledgement that he had betrayed not only me but the entire family. I found him at a small cafe, sipping coffee as if nothing had changed. Sitting across from him, I felt a mix of anger, sorrow, and disbelief. I asked him why he had done it, why he had not even tried to talk to me before making such a consequential decision. His response was cold and unapologetic. He claimed that he had done it for practical reasons, that he didn't see the point in holding onto the property when he could profit from it. He showed no remorse, no recognition of the emotional devastation he had caused. The words hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't just the act of betrayal, it was his lack of humanity, the way he seemed incapable of understanding the pain he had inflicted. After that meeting, I realized that reconciliation was unlikely. I began to consider the long-term impact on our family. My mother was increasingly anxious, frequently calling me late at night to talk about the tension and the fights that inevitably erupted. She cried often, worried that the family she had nurtured was falling apart. I tried to comfort her, assuring her that I would handle the situation, but I felt powerless. My brother's actions had disrupted the entire dynamic of our family. In an attempt to regain some control, I decided to document everything: conversations, legal documents, emails, and any evidence of the property sale. I wanted to create a record not for legal purposes because the sale was final but for clarity and personal closure. This process was painful. Revisiting memories, rereading correspondence, and reflecting on what I had lost made the emotional toll even heavier. Yet, it was necessary. I needed to understand, to externalize the chaos in my mind. Months passed, and the property became a distant, haunting presence. I would sometimes drive past it, watching strangers live in spaces that once held my childhood memories. It was a strange combination of nostalgia, grief, and anger. The trees my father planted, the rooms where we had celebrated birthdays and holidays, all now belonged to someone else. It was a constant reminder of what had been stolen: not just land, but a piece of my family's legacy. Unexpectedly, a new revelation came to light. During a casual conversation with a distant relative, I learned that my brother had not acted alone. He had conspired with another family member, someone I trusted deeply. The realization was staggering. The betrayal ran deeper than I could have imagined, implicating multiple people I had believed were allies. The emotional impact was overwhelming. I felt surrounded, as if the ground beneath me had collapsed entirely. At this point, I faced a choice: let the bitterness consume me or try to navigate through it and find a way to preserve what remained of my family. I decided to take the latter approach. It wasn't easy. Forgiveness was impossible, but I could establish boundaries, protect myself emotionally, and maintain relationships that weren't entirely toxic. I began seeing a therapist to work through the anger, grief, and disillusionment. The sessions were intense, forcing me to confront uncomfortable truths about trust, loyalty, and family dynamics. Through therapy, I learned to separate my brother's actions from my self-worth. I realized that his betrayal, as painful as it was, did not define me. I also started rebuilding connections with family members who had been unaffected by his deceit. Slowly, I found solace in shared memories, storytelling, and mutual support. My mother, while still saddened by the loss, began to find moments of peace, and I discovered a sense of agency I had thought lost. By the end of that year, I understood that some wounds never fully heal, but they can shape resilience. The sale of the property was a pivotal moment, exposing hidden fractures and testing the strength of familial bonds. It left me wary, cautious, but also more self-aware and determined to protect what truly mattered. The legacy of the property, while physically gone, remained in the memories and lessons it imparted, a reminder that trust is fragile, family is complicated, and survival often requires emotional strength and clarity. The tension in our family had reached a new level. What I had initially thought was a betrayal limited to my brother now seemed to involve deeper layers of secrecy and manipulation. It wasn't just the sale of the property, it was the way information was hidden, conversations were distorted, and alliances were quietly formed. I felt like I was navigating a labyrinth with walls constantly shifting around me, and the feeling of instability was exhausting. One afternoon, I received an unexpected call from a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. Her voice was hesitant, almost fearful, but she mentioned she had information about the property sale that could explain some of the inconsistencies I had noticed. She refused to meet in public, instead suggesting we meet at her small apartment late at night. Despite my reservations, curiosity and the need for closure drove me to accept. When I arrived, her apartment was dimly lit, cluttered with papers and photographs. She handed me an envelope filled with documents, emails, receipts, and even handwritten notes that painted a more disturbing picture than I had anticipated. Apparently, my brother had not only sold the property without consent but had manipulated several other family members to approve decisions under false pretenses. In some cases, he had forged signatures or convinced them that the sale was beneficial for everyone. The level of deception was staggering. Reading through the documents, I felt a wave of disbelief and anger. It wasn't just a simple betrayal, it was a carefully orchestrated scheme that had spanned months, if not years. I realized that my brother's actions had been premeditated and strategic, not impulsive as he had claimed. The revelation shattered any remaining sense of trust one had in him. It also forced me to re-evaluate relationships with other relatives who had been complicit, knowingly or unknowingly. Determined to confront the situation, I scheduled a family meeting. I invited my mother, a few trusted relatives, and confronted my brother directly. I laid out the evidence, explaining how his actions had affected everyone emotionally and financially. For a moment, there was silence, a heavy, suffocating pause where the air seemed charged with unspoken truths. My brother's response was defensive, almost arrogant. He denied some of the allegations, downplayed others, and tried to shift blame onto anyone but himself. The tension in the room was palpable. My mother's hands trembled as she clutched her chair, and I could see the mixture of sadness and anger on the faces of my cousins. It was a scene of raw emotional exposure, one that left no room for illusions or pretenses. Despite the confrontation, I knew that legal action was limited. The sale was technically legal, and challenging it would be complicated, expensive, and emotionally draining. Instead, I focused on rebuilding what I could trust with the relatives who had been honest and open, and a sense of personal clarity and empowerment. I realized that while I couldn't undo the past, I could shape my response to it. In the weeks that followed, family dynamics shifted. Some relatives distanced themselves from my brother, refusing to engage in further manipulations. Others remained neutral, unwilling to take sides but supportive of me privately. The family gatherings, once tense and oppressive, slowly regained a fragile sense of normalcy. It wasn't perfect, and some wounds remained open, but there was a newfound clarity in how we interacted with one another. I also took steps to preserve the memories and emotional significance of the property. I compiled photographs, shared stories with my mother and cousins, and even created a digital archive of the land's history. It became a symbolic act, a way to reclaim ownership of the legacy in spirit, if not in material terms. The process was healing, offering a sense of closure that legal documents could never provide. By the end of this period, I had learned several difficult truths. Betrayal can come from the closest people, family bonds are both fragile and resilient, and personal boundaries are essential. The property sale had been a catalyst, exposing the vulnerabilities in relationships and forcing me to confront uncomfortable realities. But it also gave me the opportunity to redefine my role within the family, to prioritize honesty and integrity, and to recognize that my identity and worth were not defined by the actions of others. Looking back, I understood that the most painful events often carry the deepest lessons. My brother's betrayal was a painful chapter, but it was also a turning point, a moment that challenged me, tested my resilience, and ultimately helped me grow. The property might have been lost, but the insights, clarity, and emotional strength I gained were invaluable, shaping a path forward where trust, while cautious, could be rebuilt with care.